Hey, what's going on guys? Daniel from ModBot. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to install MicroSwiss's new dual gear direct drive all metal Hotend into the Ender 5 printer. Let's get into it. Now this is a drop-in replacement for the Ender 5, Ender 5 Pro, and Ender 5 Plus. First thing we want to do is make sure you've got everything that you're supposed to have. So in the box, you'll have one bag that contains the extruder tensioner arm, the spring, as well as the gear for the stepper. You'll have one bag that's got various different screws, nuts, washers, and a little bit of Capricorn tubing. A third bag will contain your Hotend as well as the heat brake. Then in the next bag, you're going to have the heater block as well as a screw for the thermistor. You'll have a bag with the extruder lever. Of course, you'll have the aluminum plate that will replace your current X carriage and hold everything together. You're going to have a new nozzle for this Hotend. A bag with a couple of tools as well as all of your little Bowden clips for the filament guide. A silicone sock for the new Hotend. Your extension cable for your extruder stepper motor. Your printed filament guide. And lastly, just some cable ties to do some organization when you install this. So make sure you've got everything laid out and just double check that you've got everything and you are ready to rock and roll. There are a few things that you'll need aside from just what is coming in this box, just some tools that hopefully most of you have, like an adjustable wrench, a Phillips screwdriver, various Allen wrenches, a 10mm spanner wrench, and a 7mm socket wrench for the nozzle. You can use other tools, but those are definitely the recommended and most easy to use. I'm going to be installing this in an Ender 5 Plus, but again, it will work with Ender 5 Pro and Ender 5, and it will be a very, very similar install. To get started, make sure your machine is powered off, unplug the cable. If you were just using it, please give it time to cool down. We don't want anyone getting injured doing this. Then to get started, we are going to take a 2mm Allen wrench and we are going to remove the fan housing for the X carriage. There's two screws. There's one on the top and there's one about midway down on the left-hand side. If you've got the Ender 5 Plus, then it's in between your BL Touch and that fan housing. So just be careful when you reach in there because the BL Touch's cables are quite delicate and they do pass through there. It's going to be much easier to access it on a Ender 5 or Ender 5 Pro since you won't have a BL Touch there. Once you remove those two screws, the whole fan housing and the BL Touch is going to drop down. Also, make sure you keep your screws and the components you're taking off of your printer. A few of these will need to be used later on, so it's just good to have these off in a tray somewhere. So once you've removed those screws, push the housing off to the side. If you've got a Ender 5 Plus with a BL Touch, throw it over the top, and we're going to remove the two screws holding the Hotend to the X carriage. You'll need a 2.5mm Allen wrench to loosen these. Once you remove those, the Hotend's going to drop along with the fan housing. Then we're going to go ahead and take off the stock silicone sock that comes on the Hotend, which will allow us to access the heater cartridge and the thermistor. You're going to need a 1.5mm Allen wrench to loosen the Grub Screw on the bottom of the Hotend or on the heater block. When you loosen that, you will be able to slide the heater cartridge in and out, which is great. However, don't pull that out until you've loosened the screw for the thermistor. The screw for the thermistor is just a little Phillips screw. Just grab a Phillips-Head Screwdriver and loosen that or remove it completely, so that way you can slide out the thermistor and the heater cartridge all in one pull. Now the thermistor is quite delicate, so be careful with this. Also, try not to touch the very end of it with your bare fingers. If you've got oil on your hands and you touch that, it could damage it or shorten the life of it. It's, again, quite delicate, so just like I did in the video, pull from a little bit higher up where you're actually just pulling the cables and not the thermistor end itself. Next, we're going to remove the Bowden tube from the stock Hotend. You're just going to pull off the little clip holding it in place with your thumb, and then you're going to compress the Bowden fitting downward towards the Hotend, and by doing so, it'll actually release that Bowden tube, and you can very easily slide it out. Once done there, we're going to turn our attention to the stock extruder. We're going to need to remove that from the current extruder stepper motor. First, we're going to grab a 2.5mm Allen wrench and remove the tension arm. Make sure you unplug your extruder stepper motor as well. Using that same 2.5mm Allen wrench, we're going to go ahead and remove completely the tension screw that's sticking into the extruder. The remaining 3 screws should actually require a 2mm Allen wrench as they're slightly smaller on the top, so just remove the 3 remaining extruder screws, but use one hand to hold the stepper motor as you remove the last one, since the stepper motor will fall off completely otherwise, so just use one hand to hold that in place like I did here as you remove that final screw. Next, just like we did on the hot end, we're going to compress the PTFE or the Bowden attachment and pull the Bowden tube out. Then on the stock stepper motor, we need to remove the actual filament gear. We're going to do that by taking a 1.5mm Allen wrench, and we are going to just turn counterclockwise, which will allow us to very easily remove that part. And we're definitely going to need the stepper motor for the new extruder, so make sure you hold on to that. Now it's time to remove the belt on your X carriage. On the top left side of your printer, there's going to be 2 screws that hold the belt tensioner in place. By loosening those, you will completely loosen the slack or create slack in your X belt, which will then allow you to very easily move it up into the left of the X carriage, popping it off. And then for the right side, you do the exact same thing where you just pull it up and pop it off to the right. It removes quite easily. Then for now, we can actually get out of the way altogether. I just grabbed it from the right side and pulled it all the way through. Next, we're going to need to grab our spanner wrench, and we're going to actually be removing the bottom wheel from the X carriage. On the front end, you're going to use the spanner wrench, and on the back end, you're going to use a 3mm Allen wrench. So what I recommend doing is using the spanner wrench to just hold it in place with one hand, so that way the nut can't spin, and then use the other Allen key on the back side to then turn it counterclockwise and remove it. Once done, the wheel will pop off along with the screw and the eccentric nut. We will need to keep that, so make sure you hold on to those, and then you can actually take the X carriage backplate off altogether. We do need to get access to these V-slot wheels as we will be reinstalling them on the new aluminum backplate. So doing the same thing with these 2 wheels, using the 3mm Allen wrench and the spanner wrench, you're just going to go ahead and remove these as well. The screws and the regular washers will not need to be kept. Really, all you need off of this are the 3 V-slot wheels, the 1 eccentric nut, and that is about it. As pictured here. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the V-slot wheels on the new X carriage. We're going to grab the 2 5mm nylon patch screws. They're very easy to tell which ones are those because they've got blue on them. So we're going to take those screws, push them through the V-slot wheels, and the 2 kind of protruded aluminum threads onto the X carriage, you could just screw those in there. I use my hand to just kind of hand tight them in and get them into place, and then of course afterwards you're going to need to grab a Allen wrench and screw those in nice and tight. So you don't want any slop, but you also want to make sure that the V-slot wheels are still free spinning. So when you get the 3mm Allen wrench and you tighten these down, make sure you tighten it nice and tight so that way the wheels can't move forward and backwards at all. But again, make sure that the wheel is still free spinning without any tension. If it isn't moving at all, then you definitely need to loosen it slightly and make sure that they're able to move very easily without any friction. So next we're going to do the bottom wheel. For the bottom wheel, we're going to grab a 5mm screw that came in the kit, the Nylon Lock Nut, which has a little bit of nylon on the inside, as you can see pictured there. The 5mm washer included in the kit. We're also going to be reusing the eccentric nut that we took off a moment ago, and of course the final V-slot wheel. So you're going to grab that screw and push the V-slot wheel through it. Then we're going to grab the eccentric nut, and it does need to go in the correct direction. The side that has the post that sticks out more needs to be facing away from the V-slot wheel. Then we're going to place the new aluminum carriage on the X gantry or the X aluminum bar for the printer. Make sure you have it facing the correct way. The wheels should be on the back side and the front clear section should be on the front. And we're going to go ahead and push that third screw through the bottom. And then I used one hand to kind of hold it in place while using the washer that we had a moment ago to place the washer on the front. And then the Nylon Lock Nut should be the last thing that goes on. And then similarly to how we've been doing this, we're just going to take the spanner wrench for the front to hold the Nylon Lock Nut in place. And then we're going to use the Allen wrench on the back side to twist that. And again, in this instance, it is the 3mm Allen wrench that you'll be needing. Same goes for here. You want to make sure it's nice and tight, but still able to move. The eccentric nut's purpose is to be able to adjust the tension or slop of the wheel. So if your X-Carriage backplate, now that it's on, isn't moving freely, by sticking a spanner wrench in there and slightly turning that eccentric nut that you see pictured there, it'll actually loosen or tighten the backplate. Now that that's done, we can put the belt back on. So I put it on the right side, and then you're going to feed it through the housing on the right and just push it all the way through and grab it with your other hand. Then loop it around the back side so that way it creates a loop around the stepper motor for the X-Carriage. And then you're just going to need to pull it all the way through. So you're going to feed it down that aluminum bar out the other side. Make sure it's lined up with those two bearings in the middle pictured here. And then it's going to go back onto the other side of the X gantry or your extruder plate. Once that's in place, we need to go ahead and add the tension again. To do so, just with your left hand, pull the belt tensioner away from the center, and that'll create tension in the belt. And then using the 3mm Allen wrench, you're going to go ahead and tighten those two screws that we loosened earlier. If your belts are not centered like mine were, you can very easily just slide them up slightly on the aluminum backplate and get them center with the 2020 extrusions. Next, we're going to take the 3 included M3 screws, and we're going to be installing the stepper motor onto the new extruder. Make sure that the plug is actually facing upward, as you see pictured here. And we're going to be installing the top right, top left, and bottom left screws into the stepper motor. Make sure that you don't install the bottom right one yet. And to install these, we're going to be using the 2mm Allen wrench. Once those are in place, we're going to go ahead and grab the extruder lever, and that is what we're going to be installing in the bottom right portion. With the extruder lever, you're going to make sure that you've got the shoulder screw that will go through that lever and then into the 4th slot on the stepper motor that we haven't put a screw into yet. Same thing goes for this one. We're going to use a 2mm Allen wrench to tighten that into place. If it has a little bit of wiggle forward and backwards, don't worry about it. That's fine. Mine did too, and it will work great. Next, we're going to grab the new gear for the extruder stepper motor, and we're going to take a 1.5mm Allen wrench and slightly loosen that little grub screw. And then we're going to slide this onto the new stepper motor. Make sure the grub screw is lined up with the flat portion of the stepper motor post, as there's only one side of it that's flat. Then you're going to want to grab a little bit of some PLA filament that you can feed through the top all the way through the extruder like pictured here. What the goal is here is to line up that gear on the stepper motor with the gear on the right hand side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to wiggle the gear on the left side back and forth just to try to get it lined up with the gear on the right side. As you can see pictured here, it's nice and lined up. got a nice and firm grip on the filament. And once you found that sweet spot, take your 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench and just continue tightening it until the grub screw is nice and snug and the gear is not going to be moving around. After that, we're grabbing the tension screw and the spring. The spring needs to go onto the tension screw. We're going to then feed this through the top of the extruder and into the lever for the extruder. It only goes in one way, so just spin that around until you get the flat portion that feeds through, and then grab the adjusting knob and just tighten that so that way it is nice and snug and the screw can't pop out. As far as how tight you want it, you basically want the center screw post to be flush with that knob. Depending on the filament you're using, you might need to adjust this for flexibles or something like that, but this is a good starting point that Micro Swiss has recommended, and that's what I've been using successfully on this. Now it's time to grab the heater block. The screws on the heater block, the heads of them should be on the bottom, and so the little tiny posts of the screws, or the end of the screws, are going to be facing upward. So this is right now currently the upwards view of the heater block, and we're going to grab the heat brake and we're going to, with our hands, just thread that into the port on here. Then using a spanner wrench, we are just going to tighten that nice and tight. Then take the nozzle, do the same thing, just feed it in from the bottom side and use your hands to just tighten that into place. Once done, also grab the spanner wrench and give it a nice turn to make sure that it is locked into place. Once done, we're going to grab the heatsink and make sure that it's in the correct orientation. The top portion of it has like a chamfer, and so you want it to be on its back, which is the flat side without the chamfer. And we're going to slide the heat brake into the heatsink as pictured here. I recommend having it on a flat surface. Next, grab the little grub screw that came in the kit and the 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench, and this is what we're actually going to use to connect the heatsink to the heat brake. You want to make sure it's nice and tight, but you also don't want to strip it. So I just went ahead and I did use some tension, but I wasn't very forceful. Just make sure it's nice and snug. Next, we're going to grab the little bit of Capricorn tubing and make sure you insert the flat side into the heatsink. One side's flat, one side's cut out. So make sure the flat side is, again, the portion that goes into the heatsink. And grab the little red retaining clip and push that in. That's, again, just going to make sure that that Capricorn tubing is not able to back itself out. Now that we've got this assembled, we're actually going to slide the top of the Capricorn tubing into the insert on the extruder. We're going to grab two M3 screws that were included with the kit. These are going to be the longer M3 screws. And we're going to go ahead and tighten the hot end to the new X carriage using a 2 millimeter Allen wrench. On these, make sure that they're nice and tight. Next, it's time to put the heater cartridge as well as the thermistor back into place. The heater cartridge is going to be quite simple. It just slides in, and then you're going to need to tighten the two screws on the bottom. They will be 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench needed to tighten these. And you want to make sure these are nice and tight. You're actually going to have the heater block clamp down on the heater cartridge, so that way it's really stuck in place. If you look at it from the front, you can actually see it tightening. Then we're going to need to put in the thermistor. I use the edge of a screwdriver to just kind of tap it into the bottom hole. And then we're going to grab the small Phillips screw that came in this kit, and we're going to use that to hold the thermistor in place. It needs to be in there tight, but you also don't want to pinch the wires as it can damage the thermistor. So I would say side on going a little bit looser versus tighter just to be safe. Then you're going to turn your printer on and preheat your hot end to 220 Celsius. We're going to do this so that way we give the hot end a chance to expand, and then we can retighten everything. So for this, you're going to want to use an adjustable wrench and then a socket wrench, but I just used a tiny little kind of spanner wrench that I had to tighten the nozzle. You want to make sure it's nice and tight, but you, again, don't want to over torque it. So if you do have a torque wrench that's specific, then you can set that. But for me, just using a little, again, spanner type wrench worked great. Also, make sure you tighten the heater cartridge screws one more time, as well as the screw that connects the heatsink to the heat block or the heat break. Once done, go ahead and turn the printer off and unplug it again. Make sure that you give it time to cool down before doing this next step, but we're going to grab the silicone sock and put this over the new heater block. I had trouble getting the back left up, and so I used a tiny little Allen key to kind of stretch it through. After that, it's time to reattach the housing for the fan on the hot end. If you've got a Ender 5 Plus, then you'll use your left hand to hold the BL Touch in place and your right hand to hold the fan carriage. And if you just have an Ender 5 or Ender 5 Pro, then it's a lot easier to reinstall. So you're going to use the 2mm Allen wrench and just 2 of the shorter M3 screws to put this back together. Again, make sure it's nice and tight. You want to make sure that this housing or this cover for the fans isn't sagging at all. After this, we're going to install the printed filament guide tube. We're just going to go ahead and use 2 short M3 screws as well as 2 included nuts. Just push the screws through from the front, and then on the back side, you're going to need to use the included nuts to make sure that you tighten this down to the frame. You're going to need a 2mm Allen wrench to do so, and I'll show you guys a picture of the back so that way you can see basically what it looks like. So I use my left hand just to hold this little nut into place and my right hand to tighten the screw from the front, and that held it nice and snug in place. After that, we need to put the Bowden tube into this new setup, so I went ahead and cut the zip tie that was already in place because it made it very difficult to do so, and then you just shove the Bowden tube into the top and use the Bowden retaining clip. You're going to insert it in the tiny little opening that's towards the top of the extruder like I'm pointing out here, and all that's going to do is make sure that this Bowden tube can't again back out or slip out of the extruder. Now again, this is a direct drive setup. This tube is just in place to act as a guide tube and make sure there's no friction between your spool of filament and the extruder. Once done with that, we're going to grab the stepper motor extension cable that was included, and we're going to take the end of your current stepper motor extruder cable, plug that into here, and then plug the other end into the top of this extruder. You're going to need the added length since now it's no longer attached to the back of your machine and it's attached to the actual head of your machine. You'll want to make sure that you do some really nice cable management. It does come with zip ties. You can go as crazy with organization as possible. For me, the easiest thing was just to take the new cable and route it alongside the existing cables, and I just zip tied it to those. Then take the other end of the Bowden tube and insert it into that filament guide tube. And then you also can take a couple of zip ties, and on the side of that filament guide tube, those actually are slots for zip ties, which will really help with, again, the cable management and just keeping everything nice and neat. The last thing that needs to be done is we need to update the esteps since the extruder's gear ratio is different. MicroSwiss has created a G-code file that makes this really easy that you just download like pictured here, drag it over to the SD card for your printer, and then just plug this into your printer. Since it is a G-code file, we're just going to go ahead and actually print this file called MSDD esteps. If you select it and hit print, it'll instantly update your esteps and to what is recommended by MicroSwiss as a good starting point. Of course, each machine could be slightly different, and so you should always calibrate your esteps for your specific machine. I recently did a tutorial on this actually, and so I'll place links below if you want to do that for your machine as well. Once done with that, you're really all set. All that's left is to just double check your Z offset, make sure your nozzle is still the correct height, which in this situation, mine actually was perfect. And then the other things they recommend doing is reducing your retraction. Since it's a direct drive, you don't need nearly as much retraction. So 1.5 millimeter at 35 millimeters a second is the maximum recommended retraction length. Also, you may need to increase your print temperature by 5 to 10 C compared to the temperature that you were used to because of the fact that it is now an all-metal hot end and the nozzle is not brass. So that is all. You've installed it. You've really unlocked a lot of potential. You can print in all sorts of different materials from flexibles now to higher temp materials, and yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Don't forget to smack the like button and subscribe for more great videos. If there's anything I missed at all, please let me know again also in the comments down below, and I will do my best to help answer those questions or to add any information as need be. So on that note, again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. This has been Daniel from Modbot, and I'm out. Peace, guys.